So again, looking to how we can support governments in thinking more broadly around lower cost interventions that may not have the barriers around infrastructure and technology. So as we close out some of our research studies, we will be sharing our findings via an evidence library that we have online, conference presentations, etc. The last piece that I'll touch on very quickly is a really important one, which is around bridging that gap between research and action, and ensuring that like the evidence that we develop or we generate or that's out there not only reaches decision makers and practitioners, but are actually being used, that there's the ability to process the evidence and use it to inform and shape policies and strategies. An area where we're seeing a real uptick in interest and a need for guidance from ministries of education across the world is around developing national digital learning plans or strategies. To date, we've worked with about 20 countries to explore ways to develop and implement national digital plans or strategies. And the approach really is to focus on making sure that whatever is developed is actually in service of the larger goals of the national education sector plans. And this really helps mitigate for a tech-first approach and keeps the focus on inclusivity and universal access to education. I will say that we have a few really nice examples of engaging with ministries around digital learning plan development. More recently, we worked with a collaboration with UNICEF and Cambodia in drafting a really pioneering digital education strategy aimed at implementing it within Cambodia's school system. And then very recently as well, a collaboration between World Bank and the Sierra Leone Ministry of Education, where we supported the government of Sierra Leone in developing a national digital learning strategy. And the team starts with really looking at understanding the landscape, doing a bit of an analysis, identifying achievements, gaps, progress to date, key challenges, and then priorities moving forward. We do have a suite of resources, recognizing that this was a high need area. We do have a suite of resources that we've developed and that could be accessed via our website, and really guidance documents on what should ministries of education prioritize when crafting their EdTech strategies. So there are some resources available on our website on this. I hope these examples provide a window into the fact that we are committed to working with education communities to design interventions and truly meet the needs and supporting learning for all students, not just a select few. And so definitely using EdTech as a tool for inclusion rather than deepening some of the divides and structural inequities that we see in the global space. Over.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Verna. Some really, really rich insights, rich examples, and also just a wealth of resources and evidence that you've actually made progress on, recognizing that it is still a huge challenge. We're still operating on slim evidence predominantly. And so this work that you're doing at the EdTech Hub of strengthening the evidence base, and you raised a very important word, and that is in context, because not all examples that work in one context necessarily travels well to others. So it's really good to hear you emphasize the relevance of context and learning from other contexts in ways that can be applied, recognizing that there are also differences in conditions of learning and teaching. And so very pleased that you've raised that, and also to say that we're not surprised at all that you mentioned Ubongo, which was also a winner of the UNESCO ICT in Education Prize. So kudos to you and all your excellent partnerships as well. And we look forward to working very closely with you to build that strong evidence base. I'm just going to turn our attention to the issue of learning equity strategies, because we know that there are occasions when we intended to design for learning equity, but that sometimes our interventions have actually rolled back the plan to foster equitable, inclusive learning. And in fact, we've made and deepened notions of inequality when we've designed certain interventions. And so we certainly want to learn from that and look at the kind of learning equity strategies that do tend to work. And so, Natalie, in your work at the App Inventor, what approaches have actually really fostered equitable learning experiences? And if you can share a story or an example that really highlights how your strategies have nurtured, affirmed, and empowered learners and their communities in particular. Over to you, Natalie.
Yes, so I completely agree with Verna. When we talk about fostering equity in education, I think it's really essential to make sure that we provide high quality resources that meet the audience where they are at. So in their context and their environments and with the resources that they have access to. And it's always been very important to me that our platform and all of our education resources are free, open source. All of our curricula is under Creative Commons CC by SA. And we've been that way for 15 years. And that's been difficult, right? Because with 11 million learners a year, this is a huge investment from nonprofits, foundations, and governments. But I think this is really important in order to carry out this work, especially for low resource communities. And during COVID as well, I'll give an example. We saw a really huge spike in usage that has carried on. I'm sure many educators here experienced this, but during the pandemic, students were learning from home. A lot of them from low-income communities didn't have access to computers or laptops, and they couldn't go to school or libraries. So a lot of teachers were being creative and they shifted to a mobile-centered approach. And around that time, we also saw these initiatives that provided households with mobile devices like smartphones and tablets. And for us in particular, we saw the biggest growth in Central and South America, in Africa, and in Southeast Asia. And as I mentioned before, our approach really focuses on computational action and project-based learning. So we want to empower youth to use their digital skills to solve real-world problems by creating actual apps. And since you asked, Rafika, I have a bunch of stories to share. So I would like to talk about Dharavi Diary. So that's a nonprofit in India that we work with. They work in Dharavi, which is the largest slum in India, according to UNDP. And they've been doing this program to support young girls and women and kind of empower them in STEM and in education. So a couple of years ago, we heard about this program and these girls who were making an app that helped women in Dharavi. So there's a huge issue with sexual harassment and violence in that community. And they just started from the problem of, we want to help our moms when they're walking home from work at night. So they created this app that the idea is very simple. If you're walking home and you feel like someone is following you, you can shake the phone in your pocket or press a button and it'll let out a very large, like high volume police siren sound. So it's to scare away someone who might be a potential criminal. And they also had features for GPS sharing and group travel. But this app just really flipped that switch in those students' heads. So they realized like we can use technology to help people. And two of those girls are college age now, and they're the first people in their family to graduate from university. And then last year, we really started pushing AI components in App Inventor. So very free to use across images, LLMs, different AI tools. And we had this challenge for people to solve UN SDGs using AI. And we received this really interesting app from Brazil. So Santa Catarina in Brazil has a really large dengue fever issue. And they worked with college students and professors at that university to collect images of dengue carrying mosquito larvae. And they trained an image classification AI with these images to tell which mosquito larvae have dengue and which don't. And they work with the Public Health Commission to kind of deploy this to all the families with smartphones and encourage them to scan still puddles of water in their backyard, for example. And if it was high confidence that it was dengue carrying, you had the option to send it over GPS to the Health Commission and tell them this is the location so they could spray for mosquitoes. And I think as far as I know, now it's still being used. We also have seen a rise in learners from rural or low-income communities in high-income countries as well. So this year we started a program in rural Japan with Iridori, the Ministry of Education, and prefectural governments to kind of help the youth disillusionment issue that's happening in rural communities in Japan due to the population loss. And the goal is to go to high schools and run these workshops on computational action and have these students create apps that connect them with the people around them and help their communities. So one app that I saw was to help seniors combat loneliness. So these students were going to their neighbors and like senior citizens and connecting with them and practicing these skills. I'll give one last example since I saw someone in the chat asked about accessibility. So we also had a student last year from Ireland who is a high schooler and she is visually impaired. And because App Inventor is blocks-based, it's much easier to interact with than a lot of text-based programming environments. She wanted to create something that could help people like her live more independently. So she made an app where if you can hold the phone in front of you with the camera, it'll yell at you if it recognizes a car or a bicycle, or if the street is clear, it'll let you know. And I think the part that takes this app forward, because we've seen a lot of similar ideas, is that after she created it, she contacted Vision Ireland, which is their national sight loss agency, and started a project with them to actually test it with people in her community. So this approach really emphasizes participatory design. Children are not often viewed as having agency, I think, but that's really far from the truth. They sometimes do a much better job designing solutions to local problems than someone at MIT or Silicon Valley because they understand their problems in their community best. And I just want to end by saying to policymakers that project-based learning is good digital learning design. And I know it's generally more resource intensive, but I'm really hoping that these advancements in AI can lighten the load for educators and school systems and make it easier for us to experiment with these more innovative approaches.
Sure, thank you. It's always so fascinating to listen to your stories, Natalie. I think for me, the key words just listening to you is that students can cultivate their agency if they are engaged with as thinkers, as doers, as designers, as producers of technologies. I'm also hearing that it's also when they are engaged in a participatory approach where there is a sense of equality and less hierarchy, because I think that that sense of being equal is integral to a participatory approach. And then I'm also hearing that, and listening to both you and Werner, that it is actually these sort of stories and experiences on the ground, that it's really this ground up approach that becomes an important dimension for us to consider, especially when we're making policy. And so appreciating your appeal to policymakers as well, to consider these approaches. I've also noticed that there's a really interesting question in the chat about